Welcome to episode 29 of the Caroline Glick Middle East News Hour. I'm your host, Caroline Glick. This is my news hour, and I'm joined today by my intrepid co-host, Gadi Taub. He's joining us as usual from his den of iniquity in Tel Aviv. Hey, Gadi.
Exactly. The right wing demonstration is going to take place about 7 minutes from here. So I'm guessing I will make it in time.
See, you just led with the end of the show. This was supposed to be the big send-off. We were supposed to say, and Gadi's going to the big right-wing rally that's going to be.
I always like to trip you while you're running.
Trip me up. All right, having been tripped up, we're not going to reverse the order of this conversation. We're going to go back to my originally scheduled plan. So why don't I let the audience in on what we're going to be doing today? We're going to be talking about two things this week in this week's show. And yes, we were off last week for Hanukkah, and I forgot to wish all of you a happy Hanukkah. So this is just in time to wish you a Merry Christmas. At any rate, we were off for Hanukkah, and we're back. And today we're going to be talking about Iran and the farce of diplomatic negotiations going on in Vienna. Had a round of negotiations that were both, eminently predictably a joke and a complete failure last week. And they're going to continue this week because why not? Leave it to the Biden administration to just reinforce their own failures and not reconsider their foundational assumptions about why they should be trying to appease a totalitarian dictatorship that aspires to commit genocide. At any rate, that's one aspect that's the first part of our conversation when we talk about Iran and its nuclear program. And the second part of our conversation, we're going to be talking about Netanyahu's trial, which has really just collapsed. It's been going on for about 2 months. The prosecution they front loaded their best witnesses. They've had 8 so far, and every single one in turn has gotten up, given testimony that's helped the defense and shattered the prosecution's case. So we're going to talk about that, and then finally we're going to end with a great send off to Gadi. I would be going myself, even though I live an hour and a half away from the rally, but I have a terrible cold and many other excuses as well. So I'm not going to be going, but we will be sending off Gadi with our best wishes. So let's start with Iran. Like I said last week, you had the world powers, the Chinese, the Russians, the European Union, big three, the Germans, the French, and the Brits, sitting down in a room with the new representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, whose name, frankly, I don't know, but we can just call him fanatical jihadist number one. And so he was sitting in the room with them. The Americans were sitting in a back room because they're not invited into the main room, and the Europeans were passing them notes about what was happening inside because the Iranians refused to sit with the Americans. So in these so-called indirect talks, the Iranians did exactly what they said they were going to be doing. They said all they want from the talks is a complete abrogation of the U.S. economic sanctions on Iran. And in addition, they want the Americans to agree to an unconstitutional provision inside of their new agreement, which will bar any future U.S. administration from reinstating sanctions against Iran. So they want it all, and they want it now, and they're not willing to talk about anything else. But in the meantime, they've also made it clear that they want to annihilate Israel, that they are capable of producing nuclear weapons and of enriching uranium to the bomb.
And it's amazing that the Americans keep thinking that you can somehow appease these people while they are, there's a very rude Hebrew saying about pissing from the springboard. They're just humiliating America in public, and this administration, full of do-gooders who think that that cleansing our conscience is a foreign policy, and that others would appreciate us cleansing our culture, us the West. And they've just learned that audacity pays off. And when Trump was in power, when he just took out Soleimani, they're the head of all the octopus of proxies. The Iranians understood that there is no messing around with these people, and it's just the idea in the West that the way to treat bullies is to understand them.
But do you really think
doesn't
that's what they're
here.
doing? I mean, I'm not actually clear that the goal of the Biden administration is to block Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. I'm not at all clear that the goal of the Biden administration is to moderate Iranian positions or policies through appeasement.
But
I'm not sure of that at all.
But this is a very interesting thesis, which I would ask you to elaborate, because the idea that that the JCPOA is a way of containing Iran, I agree with you, is not true. But they do think that if they give Iran a stake in the game, then Iran will moderate. I think this was the Obama philosophy, and the JCPOA is just a cover-up for the nuclear program. Obama himself, in one unguarded moment, said that by 2028, the breaking time from low enriched breakout time to a full nuclear device bomb would be close to zero. He said that about 2028. So clearly they were going to agree to a nuclear Iran. But the thought behind it, as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, was that once Iran becomes a respectable hegemonic power a respected hegemonic power in the Middle East, then it would moderate.
See, I don't actually think that was the goal. I think that that's a very sympathetic rendition of what Obama was after, and certainly what Biden is after today. I don't because as you pointed out, the JCPOA is not a nuclear nonproliferation agreement, and in fact, it turned on its head. 75 years of U.S. nonproliferation policies by awarding or rewarding, bad behavior, illegal, illicit nuclear activities by Iran with good housekeeping seal of approval for Iran's nuclear enrichment, uranium enrichment. It's hard to view the goal of either the Obama administration at its time or the Biden administration today as seeking to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power, from seeking to from acquiring nuclear weapons, or from reaching the point where just a turn of the screw will provide them with that nuclear arsenal.
But that's not what I said. I said that allowing them a nuclear arsenal is part of the plan. But the idea is that once they are a regional power, they will have a stake in the game and moderate.
Right.
You don't agree about that?
Well, I mean, if true, then they're crazy, right? I mean, you give a genocidal, an openly genocidal regime, the most prolific state sponsor of terrorism in the world, which it has been since its inception in 1979. A nuclear arsenal, and you believe that that's going to turn and that is the means to carry out their ideological goals, and you think that once they have those means, they're going to renege on everything that they've stood for and fought for all their lives. And so that's actually so deranged as to be hard to believe. I think that what's happening here is of a piece of the larger Biden foreign policy, which is to empower America's enemies and to undermine America's allies and to undermine the United States. I mean, I think that they have a very radical view of the United States. I think they have an anti-American view of the United States. I think that in practice, the Biden administration's policies towards everyone, towards the Taliban, towards Iran, towards China, towards Russia, towards everyone. I can't think of any country that the U.S. is operating towards in a manner that advances America's national security and power, or that of its allies. It's not advancing its interests, either economic or strategic, anywhere.
In the service of what goal in the long run?
I mean, and when you also look at what they're doing to the military and transforming the military into an anti-American organization where soldiers and airmen and Marines are being indoctrinated to think that their country is evil and systemically racist and has been since before it was founded. What's the goal? I mean, I really, at this point, it's very hard for me to avoid the conclusion that these people want America to be transcended by something else. I mean, you can't. You can make a mistake in certain things and say, look, they were misguided here or there. They misread the situation in one way or another, but their intentions were pure. But when you do it across the board, everywhere, towards everyone, ally, enemy, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that they're not trying to promote America's national security or national interests abroad as they've been construed broadly for the past 250 years, protecting the United States. Look at their policy on the border. I mean, they have an open border policy. They're not enforcing any of their immigration laws along the southern border. And, they're expecting to have like 2 million people come into the United States. That's a major city of illegal aliens that are coming into the United States in the course of 1 year. They deliberately lost Afghanistan and handed it over to the Taliban. They gave Bagram Air Base to China. They knew all of this stuff was going to happen. It was eminently foreseeable. Everything that they did was foreseeable and foreseen, and they were warned against it. And Biden did it. I don't know. I mean, look, I risk, I guess, sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but there's no strategic rationality behind any of the things that they're doing. Like Ukraine, right? I mean, Russia has positioned 100,000 forces along the border with Ukraine. After what happened in Afghanistan, nothing that the United States says in relation to Putin has any credibility. The Chinese are engaging in aggressive air sorties into Taiwan's airspace. I don't know that, and the United States' strategic credibility throughout all of Asia is based on the presumption that they're going to defend Taiwan, and the Biden administration is doing nothing whatsoever to persuade anybody that that's actually a serious commitment. I mean, China looks at the United States, and I'm sure that they are very, very emboldened. They launched. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Stephen Bryan, the implications of China's hypersonic missile test. And their testing of their satellite killing space-based satellites that are capable of destroying American satellites and GPS, all of its military communications, most of its economic communications. And the United States has the ability to launch its own satellite killing satellites, but it's not doing so. It's years and years behind both Russia and China now in supersonic technology. So, and in the meantime, its military is engaged in advancing equity, and the Space Command is involved with actively recruiting minorities to serve in Space Command. They don't seem to be as intensely involved with developing America's hypersonic missile systems or producing or developing protection to them, air defenses against them. You know who's developing America's defense against hypersonic missiles? Israel. Israel is. The Arrow 4 project that Israel is developing with the United States is geared towards two things. It's geared towards, one, intercepting multiple ballistic missiles that are shot simultaneously, which is obviously a major threat that Israel faces from Iran and from Lebanon and from Syria. But the United States also faces from North Korea and from China and from Russia. But the second goal of Arrow 4 is to develop space-based, artificial intelligence-centric, apparently, as we know from Dr. Bryan, defenses against hypersonic missiles, which are basically systems. And the only way that you can really intercept them is if you intercept them very close to launch, because they move so quickly. They move between Mach 10, Mach 5, and Mach 20. So, these are incredibly fast guided missiles that are guided from the moment that they take off until the moment of impact. So they can constantly change direction. So the only way you're going to really have a chance of intercepting them is if you do it basically as soon as they're launched. And America has no protection against it. Now, Israel is not being threatened by anybody with hypersonic missiles. China and Russia aren't planning on attacking Israel with hypersonic missiles, and nobody else has them. So this is a threat that's being directed first and foremost against the United States, and the people that are developing the defenses for it, first and foremost, are the Israelis. So, I'm just saying, like, I look at what the Americans are doing in Iran, and I think it's important that, they're not listening to reason, not only on Iran, but basically on anything, because I think it really points to the problematic nature of how Israel is responding to America's strategic blindness, if you want to call it that, on the threat being posed by Iran and their contemptuous treatment of the United States in Vienna and more generally.
And Israel is under the new government instituting, it doesn't admit it now, but a policy of no surprises towards the United States. That is, Israel is subordinating its strategic interests to a regime that is hostile to its existential concerns here. I spoke on my podcast with David Schanzer from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and he said clearly, Israel can't afford to trust.
Schanzer, right?
Jonathan, yes, sorry. Jonathan Schanzer, Dr. Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, who wrote a book now called The Gaza Conflict 2021, an interesting and insightful book about the strategic context of this conflict within the struggle against Iran. And what he says is that you Israelis, you can't afford to trust the Biden administration when it comes to your vital interests.
What's most depressing to me? I mean, it's not the most depressing. There's so many different depressing things about this government in Israel that we were faced with today. But one of them is that, that they have absolutely no understanding of how to handle the Biden administration. And I'll put it in two ways. First of all, today we have Defense Minister Benny Gantz is about to leave for Washington, where he's going to be joining the head of Mossad to try to talk sense to the Americans. And they're bringing all these new data that are showing how the Americans, are wrong to be trusting the Iranians, that their model of the negotiations is wrong and they should be doing something else. But that's not going to convince anybody, and they ought to have understood it by now. So that the idea that we're still chasing the Americans shows that, fundamentally they don't get the game. I mean, the UAE does. I think it's terrible, but they sent their national security advisor to Tehran this week, where he met with Iran's new president, the butcher of Tehran, Ibrahim Raisi, who warned him against the Zionists and the Zionist plots, which was very nice of him. But here are our peace partners in the Abraham Accords, the UAE, now moving towards Iran. And the reason that they're doing it is because they get that the Americans are not with them, that the Americans are not serious about preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. And instead of Israel obviously not going to Iran and trying to make a deal with the Iranians, but instead of Israel taking matters into its own hands and doing what needs to be done, Israel is continues to put all of its eggs in America's basket when it's clear, there is no basket there. They removed it. They're not interested in anything that Israel has to say. Robert Malley, he doesn't care. He's not there. He was not put in his position in order to listen to Israel. He was put in his position to end the sanctions on Iran while giving them a good housekeeping seal of approval of the UN Security Council and the US government to go ahead and develop a nuclear arsenal. And that is just the truth. And there is another option, right? Because when Obama was president, And it became very clear fairly early on, I would say already, I saw it already in the first term, but it became, open in 2012 or 13 when word leaked out of the secret talks that Obama's people were having with the Iranians on their nuclear program in Oman behind Israel's back. That they were fundamentally unserious about preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. It was clear when they supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt against Hosni Mubarak that they had a completely different understanding of Islam, radical Islam, jihad, than Israel or the Sunni Arab states had. They supported the so-called Arab Spring, which led to the rise of Islamists throughout the Middle East. They walked away from Iraq and handed it over to Iran in 2011. So it was very, and actually the reason why all of this was known was because Obama stated that these were his policies in his June 2009 speech at the American University in Cairo, where he deliberately invited, against the wishes of Hosni Mubarak, representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood, which at that time was an outlawed organization in Egypt. So you look at all of this, and then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu looked at all of this and he realized that Israel was going to have to stop tying all of its regional policies to the United States, stop tying its Iran policy to the United States, stop tying its policies regarding jihadists, Al Qaeda, Hamas, and all the rest of them, Sunni jihadists, to the United States, because the United States was out to lunch. They just turned to the other side. And so Netanyahu used Obama's years in power, and particularly his second term, to branch out and to develop operational ties that ended up becoming a partnership with America's spurned Sunni allies. He opposed Morsi. He supported, the Egyptian military's ouster of the Muslim Brotherhood from power in Egypt in 2013. And he was able to develop very cooperative ties with the Saudis and the UAE. And he did it first, in many ways, but the most overt aspect of his operation was that he very vocally opposed America's nuclear diplomacy with the Iranians. And in so doing, and obviously the top moment of that opposition came in March of 2015 when he went before the joint houses of Congress and gave his famous speech against the nuclear deal with Iran. But all of these things served to convince Israel's regional neighbors, our neighbors in the region, that Israel was serious about preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, so that if America wasn't going to be doing it, then Israel was. And the global impact of that, leaving aside the salutary impact it had on Israel's regional standing and indeed its international standing, but it was to buy time till Trump came into office, because it's very clear today, and it was clear back then as well, that the United States is of two minds that have almost no common ground about foreign affairs. And that if a Republican were to take office in 2016, he would be able to come into a situation where he would be able to quickly rebuild America's position and power in the region, because Israel had maintained it during Obama's tenure. And that's exactly what Trump did. Trump standing in the region, America standing in the region. Trump was able to rebuild America's alliances in the region very quickly because Netanyahu had maintained the structure of those alliances when he reached out to the Saudis and the UAE and the Egyptians against Hamas, against the Muslim Brotherhood, and against Iran. So if Netanyahu hadn't done that, then, like we're seeing today, the Saudis and the UAE are getting much closer to the Chinese. The Egyptians are going off with the Russians, so that because the Arabs recognize that the Americans aren't with them anymore, and so rather than working to maintain the Abraham Accords and strengthen them and strengthen the military cooperation that served as the basis of those accords. We have the Bennett-Lapid government not understanding what they're supposed to do, and instead of working with in a very significant way with those allies in the region, they're rushing to Washington and they're begging the Americans to reconsider a position that it's very clear that they're not going to reconsider. And this is a troubling time. When you have a failure, it's one thing when you have an irresponsible or strategically treacherous American administration and a good and competent Israeli government. It's a different kettle of fish when you have incompetent leaders in both countries.
The Lapid government is presenting its policy as a new era of cooperation, of positive building of alliances, and all these are just names for their complete surrender. And the I have no hard evidence of this, but I spoke to some people recently in Washington, and they're saying that this government is just a complete hostage of the Democrats. They're just running them, and that basically the people who are pretending to run our foreign policy are, to a large extent, sock puppets for the Democrats. And this is frightening because we have a completely ignorant Minister of Foreign Affairs who is just an ignorant. He never finished high school, and they get it. They get it. What he thinks of his position as a new form of celebrity, and they let him get photographed with important people, and he just and he tweets it, and it's amazing because people from his someone from his party, who was also in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, published in Twitter a whole list of his meetings with nothing about the content. Nothing. It's just, I met this and I met this and I met this, and they're getting it. They're just getting it, and they're manipulating it. And we know that the Democratic Party has its fingers deep in the security bureaucracy of Israel through all these think tanks and joint ventures and academic discussions and think tanks and all that. And we have basically subordinated our foreign policy to an interest of a superpower that is now shifting away from us. This is the long view, and this is what we're doing, and this is presented to the Israeli public as Netanyahu. Netanyahu was so grim and pessimistic about everything, and here's a new future, and it's open, and we find allies, and we cooperate based on values, and all this, and you can see where they got the rhetoric. You can see Ben Rhodes laughing somewhere in the background.
No, I saw that Ben Rhodes was actually, he was attacking Apec the other day, right? He was saying that Apec was no good because Apec, I don't remember what he was accusing Apec of doing, but of course, what was funny was that Apec was the most abused organization by the Obama administration. They just abused them. The Apec leaders campaigned for Obama, and then they campaigned for Obama again in 2012, and they campaigned for Obama or for Hillary in 2016, and this is an organization that the Obama administration actually spied against. They spied on them during all of the things that they did to Trump. I think we've spoken about this in the past, that all of the things that they did to the Trump campaign, to the Trump campaign operatives, they used the NSA wiretaps against them for political gain, which is totally, it's a very serious felony in the United States. That practice began with their hounding of Apec in the summer of 2014 during the congressional fight over approval in the Senate of Obama's JCPOA. And yet here's Ben Rhodes attacking Apec. It's pathetic. but it's true. So you're right. I mean, there's no question that this government owes its very existence to the Americans, to the Democrats, to the Biden administration. They played an instrumental role in bringing all of the parties together to sign this coalition agreement. They were Dan Shapiro was involved in it. He was speaking, according to what I've been told, repeatedly all the time with Naftali Bennett, with Yair Lapid, and acting essentially as a mediator, organizing this whole thing. So yes, the idea that they're beholden to a foreign power that at this point is openly hostile to Israel's existential interest of preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapon, I think that that's a fair assessment.
And by the time this podcast goes on air, my interview with Netanyahu would have been already published on YouTube this Wednesday morning, tomorrow morning, as relative to the time we're recording now, the 8th of December. Netanyahu said that he spoke with Joe Biden before this government was formed, and that Joe Biden told him, let's keep the disagreements between us in closed rooms, and Netanyahu said, "I'm sorry, Mr. President, no." And this is what Netanyahu did during the Obama era was keep this option of Israeli solo solution or solo policy towards Iran without cooperation, which limited Obama's room of maneuver. We don't know what exactly Israel has done. We don't know all. We know that probably a lot of the things we see, all the strange fires and takalot, malfunctions,
breakdowns
at Gantz or at other nuclear sites are probably not the Biden administration's doing, but they just may well be Israel's. And Israel is of course the much weaker partner, but it can still play the part of, if you push us to the wall, we can cause great trouble. And Netanyahu, who did this firmly and politely, he didn't play what Nixon called the madman theory of the president. But he was very stern about this, and he said, when it comes to our existential interests, we can and we will act alone. And this is, and when you do that, you at least curtail partly the room of maneuver that even a superpower has. And there's no chance of these people doing it. They're complete amateurs, and they're still the way I don't know. It's always irresponsible to guess the psychology, but as far as I can see, they are so beholden to their own new celebrity that they're not focused on what's going on. They're just like, you see this guy and he's saying, whoa, I'm the prime minister. Can you believe that? Did you see his picture in Balfour?
I think you're right. But I also think that we are seeing all kinds of mishaps happening in Iran, particularly in Natanz. We did see an Israeli airstrike against a ship in Latakia port. That's the first time that we've seen something like that since 2018. And I think from the reports that I've seen, they were precision guided missiles that were trying to dock at the port. So there are operations being carried out, some of them rather bold. And I think that that's important. I think it's really important and I think that to the extent that this government is doing them, I think that's wonderful, because there was at least a pause of about 4 months where you didn't hear reports of anything happening inside of Iran after they took office. And so I think that what you're seeing here is a renewal of Israeli sabotage in Natanz, what appears to be, obviously, when nobody told us this. And I think that you're right. Israel, even today, has a lot of room. We have an enormous amount of credibility in this area because of the things that we've been doing for the past decade. And I think that, if they want to use it, that they can. And the other thing is that, And I just want to end this section with this and then move on to the political aspect of the reality that we're living in today here in Israel, which is also pretty troubling, as we keep alluding to. Um, but when I was in Washington this summer, I met with Iranian diaspora leaders of the Iranian community in the United States, and they have been, I think it's called the National Union for Democracy in Iran. I spoke with the head of the organization ahead of the article that I'm writing for Israel Hayom this week. They want very simple things. They want, well, first of all, they want to overthrow the regime, and I think that they speak for the Iranian people, not because they're the representatives of the Iranian people, but for the past at least 30 years, the Iranian people, all ethnic persuasions in Iran, have made clear, have put the pedal to the metal. They've risked their lives, and many have given their lives as seeking to overthrow this regime. And nobody has ever supported them. Trump, this is sort of the most despicable thing that I've seen. Is there was a Yahoo story that came out 2 weeks ago that showed that Trump wanted to overthrow the regime, that he had this whole policy that he put together at the National Security Council, and they ordered the Pentagon and the CIA to carry it out, to destabilize the regime and empower the Iranian people against the regime. And the Pentagon and the CIA refused to carry out their orders. Sounds familiar, because that's sort of the same lines that we've seen with the IDF and the Mossad over the years, of refusing to do things that they're ordered to do against Iran by the government here, by the military brass and the Mossad leadership in the past. And they slow rolled it, and they didn't do it until it was too late, until after Trump had been defeated and replaced by Biden. So, I think there's a lot of stuff that you don't have to be the United States in order to help the Iranians do. And, they're very organized, they're very smart, but they keep losing their internet access, because that's what the regime does to prevent them from communicating with one another. And for the past 10 years, Iranians have been begging America or Israel to provide them with guaranteed internet access so that they can communicate with one another, access to major internet portals like Facebook, Twitter, whatever, so that they can get their message out to the world, so that they can present the truth about what's happening inside of Iran to the world, and they can place pressure on the regime both at home and outside. And nobody's helping them. But I think that a campaign that involved both strengthening the Iranian people, standing with them, and providing them with the logistical support that they need, that they've been asking for over a decade, and continuing with the sabotage of Iran's nuclear installations, can go a long way to improving the strategic atmosphere. And and just one last thing on that, from my experience, and I think from everybody's experience, we just think about the way that things work in the world, in our own lives. You see that when you do something, whatever it is that you do, I mean, they always use the example of throwing a pebble into a pond, and then the waves going out, right? And you disturb the water. And when the water is disturbed, things happen underneath the water. And the point is, I mean, it's sort of like the chaos theory, but not really. It's just that when you actually do something, you're impacting the world around you, and then it changes because it responds to the change in its environment. And things, and you can start, it's not really a circle, they call it a virtuous circle, but you just start moving things. You start moving things in a certain direction. Everybody says, when they're giving excuses for not doing things, well, I can't get everything that I want. I'm not guaranteed 100% results if I just do this one step, what I can do. So therefore, it's not really worth it. One of the main arguments that's been given over the years for not taking military action against Iran's nuclear installations is that, well, we're not going to be able to knock them all out. The damage that would be done would be temporary, and they'd be able to swiftly rebuild. But then you don't take into consideration the psychological impact that an Israeli direct military hit on Iran's nuclear sites would have on the regime, on the psyche of the regime, and on the psyche of the Iranian people who want to overthrow the regime, on the psyche of neighboring states, whether it's Azerbaijan or Saudi Arabia or Yemen or anywhere else, how they would react to Iran once it's been proven to be vulnerable to Israeli strikes. So, I mean, all of these things people don't take into consideration when they make an argument for not doing anything. But the argument for doing something, even if it's limited, is a converse of that. If you make something change, then it changes, it responds, and if you change it in a good way, then the likelihood that continued change will be salutary to your side of things rises. So, I mean, that's how that would be the argument for helping the Iranian people, aside from the moral argument that these people have been living under the jackboot of a murderous regime that has been murdering them for over 40 years, and we ought to help them because it's just the right thing to do. But their struggle very much is our struggle, because so long as this regime lasts, it's going to seek nuclear weapons, and it's going to seek nuclear weapons to carry out its pledge of death to Israel and death to America and global jihad. And so therefore it should be ended, and we should support that.
If I can make just one last point about this, is when I said that Israel has an option, Israel also will have no choice but to use the most radical means at its disposal if it would feel that its very existence is threatened. And this is this can lead the whole of the Middle East into a complete chaos. And I'm by no means recommending such a thing, but this is not an empty threat when it comes to Israel's very existence, because we have learned the lessons of the 20th century, and we have worked to reach a situation where it would be too costly to try and annihilate us. I'm never sure. Annihilate us. And so when I'm saying that Israel can limit the room of maneuver even for a superpower, it's not an empty threat.
I agree. And I think that, let's segue now, which is just say, let's just move on to the next subject. I think we've done Iran. And, I think it's pretty amazing when you think about it. And I wrote it last week, just as a tweet in Hebrew. The testimony that we're getting now from Nir Hefetz, Netanyahu's former spokesman, who's a state's witness. He turned state witness against his former boss after undergoing ill treatment, which really reaches the level of torture from what he's described, the specific actions that were taken against him by the police at the direction of state prosecutors after he was arrested in the middle of the night, Paul Manafort style, from his home in the by armed policemen. I think when you look at this, you see that, and then he gets up on the stage, in court, and he has nothing. He's got nothing on Netanyahu. And the thing that's striking to me about this is that he's the 8th prosecution witness to go up on the stand so far. And they, as I said at the outset, they front loaded all of their top witnesses, and every single one of them was supposed to be that, smoking gun that shows that Netanyahu received bribes in the form of positive coverage from this website called Walla here in Israel, and that in exchange he gave regulatory perks and sweetheart deals to the owner of the website, who was also the owner of Bezek, which is Israel's largest telecommunication company. This never made any sense. Never made any sense, because bribery there's no precedent for referring to bribes as a receipt of positive coverage, and because Netanyahu never received positive coverage from Walla, and because the decisions on the regulatory issues that were at stake in regards to Bezek were made by the regulators, not by the prime minister, so that there was really no basis at all for the indictment for bribery. But all 8 of the, and that's what you and I and others have been arguing from the get-go, right? But what's amazing is that the prosecution's top star witnesses, all 8 of them, have gotten up and testified that we're right, that this entire indictment, this entire case is a crock of shit, crock of poop, that there's absolutely nothing to it, that it's a total lie. It's complete fabrication. There's no there whatsoever. There was no criminal intent. There was no crime. There was no victim. There was there was nothing. There was no bribe. There was no, payment for a bribe. There was nothing. So Nir Chefetz gets up and he says this, and the thing that was most striking about his testimony to me, and the fact that he attested to the fact that there was nothing, that it was all a lie, is that his turning state's witness, I think it was somewhere in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, or late 2018, was presented to the public as proof, living, breathing proof that Netanyahu was a crook and that he had to be ousted from power because he was completely illegitimate. That is Nir Chefetz's the push on him, the ill treatment. He was denied food. He was denied medication. He was put in a room filled with fleas.
That doesn't quite capture it, Caroline. He was treated in an interrogation like you would treat a ticking bomb terrorists. Right. They put all kinds of psychological and physical pressure on him. They also did something, I'm not sure if we're yet allowed to speak about it. They brought some, they did this shtick in his interrogation that led him to believe that they were going to dismantle his family, and right. They threatened explicitly that they will dismantle his family, and they made it credible, and they told him that they will interrogate him like the Shabak, the security service, the General Security Service interrogates terrorists, and that is what they did. And note that he is a witness. He's not even accused in a crime, let alone being a ticking bomb terrorist. And they're using all those methods, and he says that those methods are all designed to extract a version of event from him that would be useful against Netanyahu. That is for that purpose, they applied that kind of pressure. And in Israel, these people in the Attorney General's office and the State Attorney's office have in recent years just lost all controls and all limits, which are supposed to be protecting their human rights. It's just, Americans probably be shocked at the ease with which they can take your phone without a warrant and just search it. And they can apply pressure. They can prevent you from seeking legal, de facto, prevent you from seeking legal counsel or having any access to what is supposed to be your rights. And we are, and we should be grateful that they have tried to target Netanyahu, because all this is was done in secret, and a cooperative press. The press since Watergate where the Watergate is like the exemplary behavior, where the press, along with some secret leaker, is speaking truth to power. The press now is just an agent of the power of the state, and leaks are being officially used by the very people who apply state power in order to advance their case against Netanyahu in the press. So there was an illegal campaign of selective leaks from the Netanyahu interrogations. And
right, and the thing about it that's so incredible, and that's coming out now in spades in the trial, and that came out very clearly with Chefetz, was that this was a coup. That, that there's literally nothing behind the indictments. It's all a lie. They put Israeli society through 3 years of tumult politically because they wanted to oust Netanyahu from power. They used their power as the state prosecution, as the attorney general, to oust a popular, successful prime minister from power. This was all political. I mean, there's nothing legal here. There's nothing criminal here. And like you said, I mean, this was a fishing expedition. They arrested the former spokesman of the prime minister in the middle of the night from his house. They threatened to destroy his life. They threatened
with
to
like a Hollywood spectacle.
Right.
They did it, yeah.
For nothing. And then they presented it to the public as Nir Hefetz's testimony against Netanyahu proved incontrovertibly, and with selective leaks from the investigation, which were all lies, it works out.
It reminds an American audience of Adam Schiff saying, bombshell. Now we have, yeah.
And then when it came out that they had nothing, that nobody who came before Adam Schiff's committee said anything that could any way be interpreted as incriminating towards President Trump or any of his aides in relation to Russia. It was all a lie. It's the exact same thing. And really, obviously, we've spoken about this as well, at length, the extraordinary parallels, each one in their own way, between the railroading and ouster through a legal coup or a coup of lawyers in Israel, and what happened to Donald Trump at the hands of the FBI. And I just want to make one point that most Americans also don't make, but I disagree with the assessment of Watergate that most people make, that this is some sort of a pinnacle of free press, because you said it was journalists together with a whistleblower. But what came out just several years ago, when the whistleblower died and his identity was made known, it was a man named Feldman, who was a deputy director of the FBI. And he did it for two reasons. He had two motives. One is that he was angry at Nixon for ousting J. Edgar Hoover. And the other one was that Nixon didn't appoint him to replace J. Edgar Hoover. So that, when you talk about the role that the Justice Department played in the Trump-Russia lie, and they played a central role in that, and that the intelligence services of the United States played in using intelligence information to try to criminalize national security advisor and other members of the Trump administration and the Trump campaign. This is something that Feldman did in Watergate, right? I mean, he used the information that he had as the deputy director of the FBI to carry out an effective coup, to force Nixon from power. And Woodward and Bernstein just were his mouthpieces in the press. I mean, they had nothing without Deep Throat. Nothing. The Watergate break-in was nothing. It was a nothing burger. It would have gone nowhere if they didn't have the information that Deep Throat was feeding them about the committee to re-elect the president. And again, he was doing it as the deputy director of the FBI. So
yeah, that break-in compared to the spying on the Trump campaign via an unmasking of American citizens in intelligence intercepts via the digital penetration through Carter Page's email and phone accounts and everything else makes Watergate pale. But the thing in Watergate is the role of the press, I think, Caroline, not just Deep Throat. And the press there behaved bravely, while now the press in Israel and in America is an accomplice of the very power structure it's supposed to guard democracy against. And this is because, as you know, I think, for a while now, those internationalist elites are of the same cloth, and so the journalists and the bureaucrats and the elite businessmen are now all coming from the same universities that teach them in the tradition of Edward Said that they should feel guilty about being Western.
I agree. I mean, you wrote about this in your book, and it's been coming out everywhere. This seepage of the the collusion that you see between the elites in Western societies against the people of Western societies is something that really is a common feature of so many Western societies these days, and also the demonization, obviously, of leaders and of political camps that oppose them. Right? I mean, this is something that we're seeing repeated everywhere. Yes, and I think that what's happened with Netanyahu really is part and parcel of that. But and I don't know. I mean, I think obviously what's happening with the polling with Biden, what happened in Virginia is very, very important. What's happening with the Supreme Court and the abortion cases is important. I mean, I think a lot of things are happening in the United States are really important in terms of pushing back, in terms of pushing it back. And like I said, it's one thing when America goes nuts with Obama, but that their allies have competent and rational and clear-headed leaders who are capable of surviving with America acting, going rogue, as has happened in the Obama years. And it's another thing when we're all being led by madmen, right? I mean, or all being led by corrupt pals, or all being led by internationalists, or the jet setters. And that's my principal concern right now vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis so many other things, is that we're led by the same people, which brings us really, I think, to where we wanted to leave off, which is at the rally that you're about to head to, and that I'll be there in spirit in Tel Aviv by the Bima National Theater. So why don't we just talk a little bit about the political situation here, and where, why is this rally interesting, and why we should care about it? Yeah.
Because I think we are facing a very cynical coalition, which puts on a smiling face, but is actually playing a very unfair power game, where they're taking over the parliamentary commissions. They're pushing out the opposition from these are things you can't do in the American structure of government, but they are just bullying the opposition out of any ability to even voice, let alone fight for its point of view. And this has been done in what is technically legal and democratic, but what is essentially totally corrupt, where politicians who presented themselves as lifelong right-wingers have sold their own voters, contrary to all their campaign promises, to a left-wing post-Zionist government that is dependent on the Muslim Brotherhood. It's amazing that the Muslim Brotherhood is part of the coalition in Israel. It's illegal in Egypt. And so what means do we have to express the fact that this coalition has a majority in the parliament, but is actually a minority in the population? And one of the things you can do in a democracy is demonstrate and try to rally the public to protest, because we keep blaming them, but there is a serious fault of ours. It's if the voters of the right had gone to the polls in the same numbers that the left has, all this would not have happened. And so I think it's at this junction, specifically in our political life, it's extremely important to remind people of the legal civil means that they have to express their powers against the government. That's also it represents complete surrender to the bureaucracy and to the growing state power and eclipse of our basic liberties.
I agree so much, and I think that there's so many unfortunate parallels between what's happening in the United States and what's happening here, because of course, as Biden is dismantling sort of the foundations of American foreign policy, or what's, and certainly everything that Trump accomplished, and doing it rather systematically. He's also doing a lot of damage at home in his domestic policies, and not just in his supply line failures and his and all of that, but also really in the social policies and the critical race theories and the 1619 projects and all of the things that are geared towards indoctrinating really Americans to believe that their country is evil, that and not teaching American history, actual American history, but made up history of a different people that are evil and not America. And here in Israel, we see a very similar thing taking place in this government's embrace of very radical concepts of Judaism. They really don't have a foothold here in Israel, and trying to undermine the edifices of Israel's Jewish identity. And one of the ways that we see this is in their desire to transform the Western Wall, Israel, the remaining supporting wall of the temple in Jerusalem, which is the temple, of course, is the most sacred site to Israel, to Jewish people, but the Wailing Wall is a place where we pray. And there are very few Jews in Israel who don't either go or not to go to an Orthodox synagogue. We have almost no Reform Jews, we have almost no conservative Jews in Israel. But this government gives an outside role to both of those liberal streams of Judaism that are much more, and this is sort of part of its dependence on not only the Biden administration, but also on the American Jewish establishment. And so they're giving an outside role to the Reform movement and trying to give them not a foothold, but an actual, stake and control over the Wailing Wall, which has always been controlled by the religious establishment in Israel, which is Orthodox. And so, one of the things that's been most shocking and distressing that has happened since Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, who were, again, I ran with them for Knesset thinking that, they, not realizing that they were jerks, but certainly once I realized that they were, it never occurred to me that they were capable of doing what they did, which is to form a left-wing government with the Muslim Brotherhood. So their supporters, because they keep handing out jobs to everybody in their ministries, they had been the heads of the National Religious Party, and they had built up a real following among the national religious sector in Israel, community in Israel. And one of the notable things about tonight's rally is that for the first time, you're going to be having a sizable presence of rabbis from the national religious community and also from the Haredi community because of what's happening with the Wailing Wall. And so, we've had a lot of criticism. We've both spoken at length about the political infantility of the religious Zionist public, that they're refusing to understand what's happening because they still like Naftali and Ayelet. Well, they don't like either of them very much now. And today is the first day, or tonight's rally is the first rally that we've seen where you're going to have significant participation of leaders of the religious Zionist community. So I think that speaks to an awakening and fear that's beginning to grip people who thought that they could continue to trust Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked to do the right thing because they were, at the end of the day, the representatives of the national religious community. I think that a lot of people are waking up now, more and more people, and realizing that that's not true, and that this government is truly dangerous, both to Israel's Jewish identity and also to Israeli democracy, as well as we see, to Israel's national security.
So next time we do it, let's schedule the podcast so that you can come, Caroline.
Okay, great.
We'll be missing you here.
I appreciate that, and I'll be missing you from my house, but next time, or maybe just do it in Jerusalem. It's so much easier, and it happens to be
I'll
our
have them
eternal capital. Talk to your friends who organize these things. You're much better connected than I am with these important people. So you talk to your machers, tell them Caroline says to have it in Jerusalem.
Okay, I'll have them count me twice, once for me and once for you. Thanks.
All right, so guys, that's it for the Caroline Glick Middle East News Hour this week. Thanks, Gadi, again for coming and doing this, because it's really important. I think that what we're giving our audience is something they can't get anywhere else, and that's why they gotta watch. You gotta share, you gotta subscribe. Subscribe all of your friends and family. But this is really important stuff, because what's happening in Israel really affects far more than just the lives of Israelis. And the issues that we're dealing with here are unfortunately so similar to the ones that people are dealing with all over. And it's true that misery loves company, but it's also true that the things that work somewhere might work somewhere else. And we have to get back our countries. We have to do it. We got no choice. We just have to keep fighting. So we're going to do it. And you're going to keep watching us and sharing our videos and getting the word out. And we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Caroline. See you.
Have fun at the rally tonight.
Thank you.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.